You're about to watch the latest episode of Newscast, the BBC's daily news podcast. And if you scan the QR code you can see right now, that will take you to the podcast where you can subscribe so you'll never miss a single episode. And we are here every single day bringing you the best analysis of the world's biggest stories. Today, we're going to focus on Vladimir Putin's comments about Russia being ready for a war with Europe. How ready is Europe for that? Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and in this episode we're going to draw together some big threads of things that are happening at the same time, which are sort of different but also sort of similar. The first big thread is Russia and Ukraine, because Donald Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff has been in Moscow for talks over that 28-point peace plan, which, since it was published a few weeks ago, has been tweaked by the Ukrainians. And this is coinciding with a meeting of the foreign ministers of NATO countries, which is happening in Belgium today on Wednesday. Also, one other little bit of diplomatic activity. The German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, is here in the UK for a state visit today as well. So there's quite a lot of European and world diplomacy happening. Then the second thread is a developing conversation kind of amongst commentators at the moment, but kind of also including the Prime Minister, about is the government getting ready to do another round of its reset with the EU, which is code for getting closer to the EU after the Brexit era. So we're going to pull all those threads and then tie them up again in a nice bow by the end of this episode. And we're joined at various points by three people who are very shrewd observers of all of this. And the first one is Shashank Joshi, who is the defense editor of The Economist. Hello, Shashank.
Hello, good afternoon.
So we're talking at 4:20 on Wednesday afternoon. We've had 5 hours of talks between the Russians and Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy. You've got reports saying that the Russians turned down everything in the peace deal. And then you've got the Kremlin saying, oh, that's not true. What do you think has actually gone on here?
I think that what's happened is we had this 28-point peace proposal that, you saw, your listeners saw, and it was something that looked like it had been dictated by Vladimir Putin himself. And what happened subsequently was the Europeans and the Ukrainians said, look, let's massage this, let's change a few things, let's tweak this here and there. And then what Steve Witkoff has done is take some sort of new document and taken it to Moscow. And what's happened is the Russians have said, hang on a minute, this doesn't look like the starting point. And they have turned it down. They have clearly decided they have much more to gain on the battlefield than by giving up anything at the negotiating table now. But of course, as with previous rounds of diplomacy, it's imperative, particularly for Ukraine, but also to some degree for the Russians, to at least look as though they are engaging seriously with Donald Trump's diplomacy, lest he get very angry at them. And so I think what you're seeing is a Russian side saying niet, but saying, we'll talk about this. Let's keep engaging on this, trying to make it look as though Witkoff is going home with the perception of progress.
Right. I mean, presumably, though, if Russia rejects this as a starting point, the second that the 28-point plan started being whittled down meant that Russia was never going to engage with it. So it was over before it even started then.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, they clearly are engaging with it in the sense that it isn't normal in previous times for a real estate developer from New York to turn up in Moscow and get several hours with the Russian president. The president's son-in-law is in Moscow directly talking to a person who has the ear of the Kremlin. These are important developments, I think. It doesn't mean peace is at hand, but it means that the Russian side does feel they have to engage. They can't just say to Witkoff, to Kushner, don't bother turning up. But of course, it tells you how limited the progress is, of course, that a prospective meeting with Zelensky in Brussels in Europe that may have followed this has been called off. It's not going to happen. So there is not enough momentum here to justify Zelensky himself sticking around in Europe.
Now, Shashank, the noise you're going to hear is Katya Adler entering the studio. She's taken off her coat. She's got her pashmina because it's quite cold in here. And she's sitting down on the chair. She's moving the microphone. Hello, Katya.
Hello.
How are you doing? You look so well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So do you.
Thank you very much.
Always.
Thank you. We were just talking about do you want to call it the outcome of these talks between Steve Witkoff and Putin?
Yes.
And what it means for any kind of peace process with Ukraine.
Yes.
What's your take on where that's got to? Nowhere?
Yeah. Well, everyone's going, they've progressed, but we're not going to talk about the details. I think from a European perspective, hearing Vladimir Putin making veiled threats towards Europe yesterday, basically saying, I'm not looking for a war with Europe, but if Europe's looking for it, we're ready. I think it's very significant that today, I mean, there's so much, that's that awful, I hate that phrase, flurry of diplomacy, but there's a big old flurry at the moment. But if you have a look at NATO foreign ministers meeting today, obviously to discuss this peace proposal, not that they really know, and they don't have it in front of them. They don't know, is it 28, 21, 22, 19 points by now? Who's not there? The United States in any significant form. Marco Rubio, not seen for dust. What is the United States to NATO? The most important and powerful member. And, you know, this leaves Europe watching on the sidelines, whatever they're saying. And you even heard from NATO Secretary General today, the only person who can break the deadlock is Donald Trump. And yet, I'm gonna shut up in a minute, Adam.
No, please.
You know me, just one more thing. But I think it's not Europe. You know, often you hear of the Middle East, Europe wants to be a bigger player. But when it comes to Ukraine, this isn't Europe saying, oh, it's not fair, we're left on the sidelines. This is about Europe's future security, right? And that is the key. So it's not just we're left out, it's we're left out and this matters. Ukraine, what happens in Ukraine affects all of us. That is absolutely the conviction amongst European leaders who are meeting today.
It's not only that the United States has not sent its Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to this meeting of NATO foreign ministers. That in itself is highly unusual. I think that this is the first time that has failed to happen for more than 20 years. It's equally notable that, and most people wouldn't have noticed this, that the Americans sent the Deputy Secretary of State, Christopher Landau, who's a former ambassador to Mexico. And what's interesting about Landau is just a few months ago, this summer, he was caught posting on X a message to the US ambassador to NATO, effectively making fun of him for saying that NATO was talking to Asian allies, and said that NATO is a solution in search of a problem. So I would call that adding insult to injury, sending not just a junior official, but also one who has effectively insulted NATO in the last few months.
An insult he then deleted.
An insult he
after everyone saw it.
deleted.
But yeah, exactly. Once it's out there, it's out there. Katya.
So I was also the timing of the peace proposal is interesting, and I don't know what you both think of this. Obviously, conspiracy theories abound, but the publication of the allegedly US peace proposal of 28 points comes at a moment of weakness, particular weakness for Europe and for Ukraine. And if you have a look at Ukraine, they are really struggling to kind of regain sort of military initiative in the Donetsk region.
Big political crisis at
massive
home over
renewed corruption crisis. So that puts Ukraine on the back foot. And as for Europe, I mean, they are split. I mean, okay, today we've heard from the European Commission who said, we've come up with an idea of how to use the frozen Russian assets we've got in Europe to help, with reparations in Ukraine to provide 2/3 of Ukraine's financial needs. It is a proposal. So far, they have abjectly failed to come to a solution on this. And listen, honestly, I mean, you watch Brussels, but, a year ago they were saying, we've got a solution as to how to use it. So split over that and split over this peace proposal and how far to push back against the US, with many in Europe behind the scenes really feeling that this is all really sort of skewed towards Russia, and that many in the White House have just accepted that Ukraine already has lost. One thing, though, that I will say, one thing, when do I only say one thing? One thing I would say is that this renewed push with this peace plan is focusing minds in Europe, because it is clear that Donald Trump, yes, of course, he said, if I become president, I'll solve the Ukraine war in a day. And of course, this hasn't happened. He wants to get this done. Quite clearly, he is choosing in as short time as possible to get an end to this, an end, but not a solution. So what it is doing, it's focusing European minds not in the short term, which many behind the scenes see Washington as going for, but in the longer term. What plan can Europe come? And I'm saying Europe rather than EU intentionally, because this is very much the UK involved as well. Yeah. What plan can Europe come up with, a new security architecture for this continent. And crucially, this will include how to deal with Russia going forward as well, because Donald Trump can turn his attention somewhere else afterwards, but the Europeans will always be next door to Russia. So this will become key if and when there is peace in Ukraine. How do you keep a sovereign Ukraine? To what extent are they welcomed into the EU or into NATO? What kind of security guarantees, real security guarantees, can they have? But also, how do you deal with Russia going forward that doesn't reward Russia for aggression, but allows you to deal and talk to Russia going forward?
So much to think about. Shashank, those comments from Vladimir Putin yesterday about Russia being ready to fight a war with Europe, I mean, that requires... Do you remember, I don't know if you ever did this thing at school that we call parsing, where you basically, your teacher gave you a sentence and you had to split up the sentence into each individual word and write a little set of notes about what each word was doing in the sentence?
We did that with Shakespeare plays.
Well, we just did it with normal English. The cat sat on the mat, verb, adjective, whatever. Shashank, do some parsing then for that sentence from Vladimir Putin, because if you read it and you just see it cold, you think, oh, right, he's up the stakes quite dramatically here. This is scary.
These statements, it's always the if, it's always the conditional that's critical, isn't it? To take up your challenge of parsing it. It's as with all his nuclear threats, they sound scary, but they're often conditional on some unrealistic scenario, such as if Europe attacks Russia, if America nukes Russia, things that won't happen. I think that what's happening is we're in a moment in Europe in which the level of Russian, what you might call hybrid activity on European soil has been going up. And of course, the most dramatic manifestation of that was a derailment of a Polish train not long ago, sabotage on Polish rail lines attributed to Russian military intelligence. We've also had drone sightings, as you know very well, other acts of sabotage. And we're having a conversation in Brussels and in Europe as a whole on whether we have been too passive. Indeed, I asked Mark Rutte about that when I interviewed him about a month ago, and he insisted, no, we're all fine. We're escorting these Russian planes. But I think what you're seeing is a realization perhaps Europe needs to be a bit more aggressive in response. I think Vladimir Putin is listening to that conversation, and he is trying to preempt a European response by saying, I am also willing to raise the temperature. And he knows when he says that it makes a lot of people in Europe very nervous about the prospect of World War III, about the prospect of instability. And I think what he hopes is that this causes governments to pull back, governments particularly in countries where there are strong populist parties who are opposed to a tougher line on Russia. And you might look at the AfD in Germany, you could look at the RN in France, the far-right party, you could look at Southern Europe. And I think Putin is trying to instill a degree of caution in European leaders at a time of that debate taking place.
I think you're absolutely right. But I think if you look at those countries that you just mentioned there, France, Germany and Southern Europe, what joins all of those countries is they're pretty far away from Ukraine. So, and I think that's what Putin is doing. When he makes those statements, you're absolutely right. When he was making the nuclear threat, or now when he was making the threat of war, it is to divide, and weaken. But what I think is really quite interesting is that with the drone attacks, if you like, or the drone sightings, which have shut down civilian airports. I think perversely, we don't know to what extent Russia is behind all of those, or to what extent even the Kremlin is behind all of those. But what it does is it actually brings the war home to countries further away from Ukraine, because it involves our lives. I think Gatwick Airport was shut down back in 2018, I think, by drone sightings, which wasn't linked to... Very mysterious. But those kind of things will make people feel more exposed and more vulnerable. And in a way, I think possibly it helps governments, NATO governments, to sell to people why they will be spending more on defence. Although this whole talk of 5%, every NATO member, bar Spain, agreed to spend 5% of GDP on defence. That's 3.5% of real spending on defence, and 1.5% in defence linked. It could be roads and railways and bridges and things like that. behind the scenes, NATO still insists that this is the case, right? Everybody's signed up to it, bar Spain. Behind the scenes, this is not the case, Adam. Behind the scenes, you have a lot of people in NATO saying, how can we do that? I mean, think about it here in the UK. We had a nervous breakdown about increasing defence spending by 0.25%. Why? Because 0.25% doesn't sound huge until you look at what that means in real terms when you actually need more money for the health service or to clean up rivers or, for the justice system. So I think although the general public, because of these drone sightings, is more sort of attuned to a threat that it does exist in their everyday life, we all know what it means, energy security, now that all of our heating bills went up so dramatically after Russia's full-scale incursion into Ukraine. And still, I don't think that leaders are, leading politicians, prime ministers, presidents, whatever, are being honest enough with the public about the trade-offs if you spend that much more on defence. And that's why behind the scenes you're hearing that 3.5% is not going to happen.
Yeah. And also people say it with their fingers crossed anyway in the hope that Donald Trump will be long gone by the time that they actually have to pony up the money. Right, Faisal Islam is here.
Hello.
And the winter wear is continuing. Katya's gone for the pashmina. You've gone for is that a puffer gilet?
Yeah, it's a puffer gilet. It's very
over
posh.
the top. Shashank, just a couple of minutes before I let you go. Sort of related to the next conversation I'm going to have with Faisal and Katya is about increased UK closeness to the EU. But we got an example in the last couple of days of where that closeness isn't necessarily as close as some people might like, because there's this big new defence fund called SAFE, and the UK is part of that as a non-EU member state, but not as huge a part of it as some people here would have liked.
That's right. And it's particularly galling because, of course, in the last couple of days, Canada has just done a major deal as a non-EU country, of course, and it has joined that fund, SAFE, that you mentioned, Adam. And I think what's really interesting is, why has the UK talks broken down? Why has the UK failed? And I think partly it is just simply the fact that although the UK is much more important to European security than Canada is, from an objective perspective in terms of our importance, we used to be the largest defence spenders in Europe. Now the Germans have unfortunately overtaken us. But the problem in a way is exactly that. Our defence industry is so important. Companies like BAE are so, such behemoths in Europe that there are a number, I think, of European champions. Think of Dassault, the French national champion in France, or others, who will be thinking, if the UK is part of this scheme, that could edge us out. That could mean less of the pot for us. And the problem is the EU, as the Commission, was, as I understand it, asking the UK to pay very, very substantial amounts into this pot. I think it was, somewhere in the realm of at least 2 billion euros in the final instance. And the trade-off just wasn't worth it. And what this tells me is that of all the panicked concerns in Europe about Donald Trump, about America pulling away, we're still not in a position where that's enough to overcome these traditional defense industrial rivalries.
And this whole SAFE thing reminds me of two things, Katya. Number one, it reminds me of the COP climate change negotiations in Brazil a couple of weeks ago, where the UK did not contribute to a massive fund to protect forests, even though the UK was one of the countries that designed the fund in the first place. And so that was considered a bit embarrassing by other countries. But it just shows you there is not enough spare money around in the Treasury to do these things. And secondly, it reminds me of Brexit and how the EU, no matter what else was happening in the world, their priority was maintaining the cohesiveness of the EU rather than helping out another country in the world.
And it's not very cohesive inside the EU, frankly, because, when we're talking about defence spending, we're really talking about Europe rather than EU. So it's individual countries and their defence spending. The EU is spending more on defence, but it's piffling by comparison. But, the problem, even inside the European Union, is there is so much doubling up, of tanks or this or that. There has been talk forever and continues to be today about how in NATO and how in the EU, let's come up with a joint plan. And you do the tanks, we'll do the plan. I'm oversimplifying completely. But absolutely, as we're hearing there, the French have felt very threatened right from the beginning. Right from the beginning, there were dark mutterings about not wanting the UK in SAFE because we are too active, we are too competitive on every level, mass production wise or R&D or anything like that. It is a threat. And yes, there was a big amount of money that the UK thought they could bargain down. And at the end of the day, it was just considered too much. But within the EU, They cannot get over these national rivals. Because also think about it from a
so maybe when I said the
view.
word cohesiveness, that wasn't the right word, but kind of the EU's own interests as opposed to
let's say France.
sacrificing its interests for the greater
and
good
let's
of the
say
world.
Germany, let's say the big players, and they don't want to do that. And yet look in NATO and how much they looked to the UK and need the UK, or if you have a look at the coalition of the willing, and also look at the money. I mean, France is out there about supporting Ukraine, and, it is absolutely front and centre, along with Sir Keir Starmer. But when you have a look at, we know the kind of, I've been talked to in the past about the disasters over the French budget. Look how much in the proposed 2026 French budget has been set aside to help Ukraine financially, 120 million.
Right.
Euros. That's not very much.
So
is
Macron
it really?
talks big and spends small.
Talk big, spends small.
Shashank, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to talk to you as always.
Yes, mind-expanding stuff. Right, Faisal, we've got you here because there seems to be a clutch of newspaper articles and commentary that Keir Starmer is about to launch some kind of new, revived process of getting closer to the EU on top of the many different processes that are already happening. And we just heard of one that is not going as well as people might have thought. What's your take on why this has all come roaring back this week?
Well, it's a combination as anything of what's going on in this sort of Brexit reset negotiations. It's been happening kind of below the hood, really. It hasn't been central. Indeed, I think one of the things that has precipitated this is the fact that Nick Thomas-Symonds, the Cabinet Office Minister that's in charge of this, is now an actual Cabinet Minister.
Or attending the Cabinet.
Sorry, you're right. Okay. I think people were quite shocked that he wasn't a Cabinet Minister in the first place, given that this is seen to be a priority. You're right about the safe issue. I think the particularly galling thing is that Canada's entry fee to this European Defence Pact at a time of important geopolitical rearmament, it's a fundamental change, is 10 million euros. Whereas the initial fee being bandied around for the UK was 6.5, which was bargained down to 2, which was seen as too expensive. There's some sort of formula here that essentially kind of punishes the fact that the UK, with its massive, hasn't got a massive manufacturing industry, but with its competitive armaments industry, defence industry,
UK companies are a bigger threat to French arms companies.
Well, you see, is it a threat? Is that entirely the wrong lens through which to see this? Is the UK essential to Europe's massive rearmament plans? The German budget is changing hugely. It clearly was going to be of great benefit to UK industry to get in at the ground level as these processes start, to help supply the Mittelstand, the German manufacturing area that they're diverting from the car industry to arms.
Yeah.
You want to be part of that supply chain, you've got to get in now. So I think that explained the urgency of the government. And from what I hear, they're just going to try and wait to change the payment scheme. Maybe it becomes pay per play or
some
sort of Klarna-like scheme was described to me.
But there's plenty other opportunities.
Yeah, and they may settle this in spring. You can see the mutual interest, but I think all fingers are being pointed at the French here. This is why you have the charm offence with the Germans. As far as I'm aware, that if it was down to the Germans, we'd be in. But there is a potential substantive economic win for a certain type of manufacturer that's an important place. Now,
okay, so that's one example of getting closer that's kind of not worked out as planned. What about the other ones?
Well, so I think the more general backdrop here, though, is obviously the politics. So you now have, if you like, this time a year ago, we would have assumed that if you talked to someone in Downing Street, they would think they're worried about a reform voter, a reform-facing seat. That is the strategy of the government. That has obviously radically changed in the past year, and they're now facing, I think it's fair to say, a fairly insurgent Green Party. One imagine, they've shored up a certain type of Labour loyal voter on the left, but
with things like the two-child benefit.
All sorts of positioning, even on the environment itself, one might argue. But they're obviously casting themselves to the left. Obviously, there's a whole load of other Labour voters in the centre, you might argue, the Europhile wing that maybe didn't vote Labour thinking they were going to get back into the European Union, but like friendly vibes towards the European Union.
Yeah.
And so this government has tried to kind of doff its cap towards that sentiment. But is there some competition in that area now? If they're going to be moved closer, and just remember what their instincts are. We know what Keir Starmer did in terms of the second referendum when he was in Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet. What do they actually think? I'm told that number 10 is particularly captured, back to our old friends, the Office of Budget Responsibility, some of their analyses of what is winning and what might transform Britain's sort of bumpy economic growth fundamentally? What could transform it for free? And those arguments, even though this EU reset negotiation did not count as growing the economy more under the OBR, they did put out some indicative estimates as to what could happen over the longer term. And you're talking about a 0.25 percentage point long-term uplift for growth if you combine the veterinary deal, that's the food standards deal that is being negotiated, and the emissions trading scheme, which is complicated, linking the two up, you get to 0.24. Like, not massive, but for example, double what the India deal would do. So you're certainly saying two quite, I think I can say this, obscure corners in acronym Brexit corner could nonetheless do more than what was, I have to say, in and of itself, an impressive deal with India, the likes of which India has not done with anybody else. So they're looking at these numbers now. Into that mix, you get some very well-sourced colleagues suggesting that the Prime Minister's economic advisor, Manish Shafiq, who is fairly new, raised the idea of Britain join the customs union. Now, I'm not sure the context of that conversation. Rachel Sylvester is very, very well sourced. Was it more of a sort of, well, you could do this?
She was the journalist at The Observer who wrote this big piece at the weekend that contained that nugget.
Yes, and the Lib Dem leader today went with that, saying take that advice. So you have a combination of the economic, the political. You have him just keep on mentioning it in speeches. I did an interview with the Chancellor where she kept on mentioning it.
Another huge amount to think about there, Faisal. Thank you. But Katya, this again is making me feel very nostalgic because
You're always nostalgic. Is it just me? Is it just me? Am I?
Well, we've known each other for a long time. We've had some happy times.
Yeah,
exactly.
You have to rename it again.
Sorry, Faisal. You're
no. You have to rename it. It'll be post-Brexit cast or something. Yeah, exactly. Or reset cast.
What this is reminding me of is at moments in the Brexit process when there'd be a whole load of domestic political flummery that was designed to create a vibe at home in the UK, and the EU would be like, yeah, well, come back to us when you got something on paper and we can actually negotiate.
And that's how it remains.
But there is still a few things they actually are negotiating on paper.
They are,
kind of
veterinary, I mean, what you're talking about, but this was in the manifesto. I mean, this is old news, right? And it still hasn't been done because these things, the devil's in the detail, blah, 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 blah. But this ain't new. So from the EU, this was started. Labour said they were going to do it. If they won, they won. It started. It continues.
Yeah, so they are negotiating the veterinary thing, also known in the lingo as SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary, is the idea of a deal between the UK and the EU on plant and animal health standards, the impact of which would make it easier for UK exporters to sell plant and animal products to the EU and vice versa, because it would bring the UK and the European standards on those things closer together. Yeah. They are negotiating the youth experience scheme, which used to be called youth mobility. That is being negotiated, isn't it? It's just not anywhere near. Oh, Faisal's smartwatch strikes again.
I'm so
he hasn't
sorry.
worked out how to put it on silent.
No, they changed the setting. Tim Cook, this is your fault.
I did try and help. Anyway,
children,
and there's a few other bits and bobs that they are actually in the process of negotiating, but haven't actually borne fruit yet.
Yeah.
So then it's a question of all these signals from Starmer and Rachel Reeves and other people in these last few days. Does that sound like they're gearing up to actually add a whole load of extra things into an actual formal conversation with the EU?
So I think on the other side of the small pond, that the sense is this is about domestic politics at the moment, again, like a lot of the Brexit negotiations debate was. And there is this sense like our plate is very full. When you've sorted out what you want to rejoin the customs union, fine. You want to come into the single market, that makes less sense for the UK because of services, fine. Nobody. Somebody asked me today in the building here in the BBC, do you think that Starmer wants to rejoin the EU? There is no whiff of that in Brussels. I mean, and they wouldn't even have the headspace. I mean, they're not thinking about this full stop. They are thinking about us, the UK, 100% as a partner in really unstable geopolitical times. When Donald Trump, at the most polite, is viewed by European leaders as hugely unpredictable when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to his attitude towards Europe, tariffs or whatever. China, where do we stand on China? Friend, foe, useful, not? These are common questions that Europeans share. how do we stand by Ukraine, but find the money to support Ukraine, find the weapons? Do we send our soldiers on the ground? All of these things are questions that the UK shares with its European friends and partners, which is the... And so we are very much together there. And I think the whole perspective is different. Internally, we're still like, how are we reversing Brexit? Are we going back to the EU? But when you talk to mainland European countries, the way they see it is the new world order, the order of of big power politics. It's China, it's India, it's the United States, it's Russia and Europe. Is Europe able to stand together on certain issues? When it comes to energy security, as you mentioned, that is something that the UK wants to work together with the EU. This is not reversing Brexit. This is about making financial sense. So these are individual issues where it makes sense, like defence, to stand together. And that is very much alive in European minds, not a reversal of Brexit.
But I do think that there are some big directional choices for the government to make, even in these smaller areas, because in some of these areas, there has been divergence. That was the whole point of Brexit, the type of Brexit we got from the previous Conservative government. And some of those...
Keir Starmer the freedom to have different AI regulations, for example.
So AI regulations, probably in this context, it's things like, I forget what they call it now, gene-edited, genetically modified. I think they're called novel foods now. We've taken some freedoms in that area that are supposedly better for the UK and our science-based kind of approach to these things. What are we going to do with those when we want an SPS, a food deal, where there would have to be alignment? So as I understand it, there is a process, a ministerial process, where they're trying to establish which bits of these divergence do we have to keep or which bits are we okay with, so that we get as frictionless trade as possible. And I think it's quite interesting how we frame the veterinary deal, for example. Okay, on the one hand, it's less checks, absolutely correctly. On the other hand, someone said, well, you could get back to near single market status for food trade and agricultural trade. Now, that sounds, it's perhaps almost exactly the same thing, but it sounds quite different. And then what is the process from here on in? So what I'm hearing from business, and this is a change, under the previous government, businesses, I don't think it's unfair to say, were basically told to shut up. If they wanted to keep close to Europe, if they wanted to keep their kind of trading arrangements, they were like, you can't have that. It's gone. You're going to have to rebuild and you're going to have to accept all this red tape. They're now being told, we need to know where you want things to wind back a bit.
Right.
You need to make a case for it. And once we've got through these negotiations, which will come to a head, I think, with some sort of summit next year, we want the next set immediately, right? So they're already planning for that. So I think this is what people are picking up. And this is why you're getting the drumbeat. And you can start to see, if you like, the politics. And I totally, I don't even know what this must look like from across the pond. But I think that the sands are shifting on the Labour side of politics. Now, what does that then do? I think that they're starting to think ahead to the next election. I'm thinking, well, we're going to have a set in place a series of better trading arrangements than were left to them by the Conservatives. And we're going to challenge the Conservatives and reform to rip this up and add to the red tape.
I've just realised what's happening. We're now entering phase 4 of the post-Brexit cinematic universe. It's like Marvel.
That's a great title for a song.
Not many download. Well, that would be in no one's Spotify Wrapped. So basically, phase 1 was Boris Johnson in his pomp pre-COVID. Freedom, 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 maximum sovereignty, maximum tension between the UK and the EU. Phase 2 was then Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Actually, we need to dial that down, solve some problems, things like the Windsor Framework for the Northern Ireland Protocol. Then you had phase 3, which was Starmer and Rachel Reeves coming in and saying, we can ditch all that talk and actually let's just be pragmatic and look at focused areas where we can get an improvement. We're now entering phase 4, where the government sounds much more pro-EU, not pro joining the EU or the customs union or the single market, but just being relaxed about talking about the benefits and looking around for what the actual next episodes of being closer we're going to be.
I think you're right that there is a new sort of sense, a new confidence that's coming out of the UK towards the EU, saying in these areas we want to work more. I think the EU sort of feels that ultimately domestic politics trumps that. So, after Labour won the election, there was so much talk about the reset, but the EU felt there was none. It was a lot of talk, but very little actually happening. So the talks about the veterinary agreement started, but it's one step forward, two steps back. Are we going to be able to get a trade deal with the United States, even a limited one? Because you say the freedom to diverge, like by leaving the EU and all of its rules and regulations, means that you can do different trade deals with others, and the US being of paramount importance. And the EU has always said you can come back in any way, shape or form you want inside a customs union, or just individual bits as we're doing now with the veterinary agreement. But when you do it, you align with us and our rules.
Yeah.
And that is the complicated thing. So I think what the EU sees is, if you're ready to play, we're with you. We've got this committee. We're always there. There is a once yearly summit now set up between the EU and the UK, as you were referring to there, which is sort of the culmination of it annually. But at any point, now Labour feels it's safer to talk about, getting closer to the EU again. But at any point, it might look at polls and say it's not safe for us anymore. And so there is, I'd say in Brussels, there's a practical mindset and a slight wariness.
Well, and they'll be looking at the polls too, and looking straight through things about, well, how long will these guys be around for this sort of negotiation? But I think it's the fact that they're willing to talk about the disbenefits of the Brexit deal so clearly, when there was a sort of omerta about that. We kind of know what they feel and what they have campaigned for over years, but they're really leaning in now to that. And you wonder where the logic train goes. And I guess I'm just trying to think in terms of political economy. If you imagine a sort of Zach Polanski, who hasn't really said a lot about Brexit, but my recollection of their policy position was that they wanted to get closer. I can't quite recall if they were full rejoin. But if they make a big song and dance about that anytime soon, I don't imagine suddenly that change, that shift in which voter do we care about the most. If it's Morgan McSweeney, we think it's the Reform voter, right?
Yeah.
But the other force is around number 10 now, and clearly number 11 as well, who've got a big part to play in this debate, are now caring a lot more about the Green Party voters. And their next move, I'm going to guess here, would be to say, well, the pathway to rejoin, which, how many people want to do that in Britain? I don't know. But the polls in terms of people thinking that Brexit has been a success have been pretty negative for some time now. It's I guess it takes two to tango is the point.
The EU's not tango. I just think
is it foxtrotting?
No, not even. I think it's just, well, you know what it's like there. I mean, Brussels is full of bureaucrats, right? They look at pieces of paper and rules and regulations and deals. Amongst the member states where, the emotion was involved, they're just not engaging with this. As I say, UK is the friend and the partner. The bitterness of all of those years of Brexit negotiations is absolutely gone. And we are seen as a very important partner on the European stage, first and foremost in terms of Ukraine and defence, with Sir Keir Starmer having taken a very big lead role right from the beginning, and always having been in Western Europe one of the most Russia skeptic, most Russia wary. And I just think that's sort of how it's viewed in the capitals right now.
Yeah, and I think if you go back and you read Keir Starmer's speech that he did on Monday to this banquet in the City of London, where he was in his white tie, and which is one of the pieces of evidence that people are citing now for they're revving up for a renegotiation to get closer. Actually, if you read in black and white what he said, it was mainly a political attack coded on Nigel Farage, and Starmer was comparing the current conversation about the European Convention on Human Rights with Brexit. This idea that walking away in itself solves the problems. So it was aimed at people who are flirting with that.
But even that, they obviously think strategically that talking about Brexit will be a net positive because there's a bulk of the population that they feel might vote for them that will connect with an argument about Nigel Farage and it being negative.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just thinking.
So I think
people
that
took
shows
that
something,
and then sprinkled some water on it on the magic beans and came up with this. Oh, they've got a policy to get closer.
Well, but Adam, if you think about it, if you think about what one of their successes over the past year has been signing these trade deals, which have been signed with Brexit freedom. So it's quite something. There's a bit of a paradox there. In fact, the fact that they managed to do a deal with the Americans at the same time as launching the reset with Europe, we're literally told that wasn't actually possible under the previous government.
But I'm just going to, objectively speaking here, let's say that the deal with America was limited.
India is a better example. You're absolutely right.
Very limited.
Yeah.
And the reset with the EU has been very limited.
Yeah.
So actually, they're not in contradiction with each other.
Not really.
Neither is
hang on. So if you take up the customs union proposal, for example.
If
you were to
but
go in
so-
that
but
direction.
so far they haven't been in competing territories, and therefore,
So the-
Yeah,
in-
because the customs union would require you to basically sever a lot of your trade links that you've just done with your trade deals independently. And then also, we remember from the Brexit days, from the Theresa May UK-wide backstop, which was effectively a
I was
customs
about to say
union in
that-
disguise,
well,
required, signing up to loads of EU standards.
Adam, I was talking to somebody who's pretty connected in this area, and he even brought up, well, was Minouche Shafiq talking about the customs union
Or
a
a
customs
customs
union?
union.
No,
Like
this is
turkeys.
it. No, I've just had that conversation, and I was like, and this will go back to Newscast,
that go back
Brexit
a
cast
really
episode
long
12.
time?
No, this is back to your episode about the pan-Euro-Mediterranean cumulation deal.
No, apparently Europeans don't
Another
want
good
that.
name for a song.
There we go.
Right,
Get your binder out.
I think we've covered more than enough ground there. Have either of you checked your Spotify Wrapped
Wait a minute,
yet?
wait.
What?
I have to do a plug.
Oh, yes. Okay, yeah, please do. Yeah. Oh, that's the pretense that we lured you to the studio under. Plug away. Be my guest.
Plug away. So, my latest doc series, which doesn't have a proper title yet, but the working title is The Big Four Next Door, and this is
Well, that
very
was
much.
the real title. I've been telling everyone that's what it's called.
Well, that's what I'm calling it.
You've just
then.
been blabbing. Okay.
But essentially, this is what it's designed about. It was Boris Johnson originally who was talking about we have to work much more closely with our European friends and partners. Leaving the EU doesn't mean leaving Europe, etc. But so what this 3-part doc series is about is, do we actually know our European friends? How well do we know Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the biggest economies in mainland Europe? And often we don't. I mean, we go on holiday to a lot of these places, so we think we know them. So it's a look at the inside of the countries. What are the stresses inside, like we have at home? What do they have at home? And also, how are they dealing with, should we say, the challenges from abroad, whether it's China, Russia, or the United States? But it's done without any political voices. It's done very much from the ground, and hopefully it is enjoyable as well as informative.
And when's it going to be on?
So I don't have a date yet because
Title, TBC, date.
Well, it's 3 hours of telly. So we're asking a lot. So I really hope to all of newscasters that you will find it a worthwhile and really interesting watch. Sometimes laughing at my expense. That's partly what these documentaries are about. So it's asking a lot. We're in the editing process now.
Right.
It's a big old edit. Yeah. So I think end of Feb is probably, we'll deliver at the end of January, and then maybe end of Feb. I'll be back plugging.
Well, yeah, we
but
might
I just
have a
want
little...
to say it's relevant to our discussion today.
Yeah.
Right, is what they're thinking next door and how well we know them.
Maybe we'll have a little newscast watch party for the first episode.
For 3 hours.
Or maybe just, the first episode. Don't want to demand too much of people.
No, it's like Wicked. That is the first episode.
Katya Adler for good. Anything you'd like to plug, Faisal?
No, I don't.
What about you, Adam?
I mean, I'm just here, same time, same place every day. I was thinking about Spotify Wrapped. Do it when you finish work today.
Yes.
Just let your little update from Spotify.
It will be wicked.
What you've been doing all year because of your kids, I'm guessing.
Yes.
They tell you what your listening age is based on what you've been listening to.
What's yours?
83.
What? Is it Elvis? Is it loads of
I'm
Elvis?
so sorry.
83.
My kids have asked me not to cackle in public anymore. I've just broken the rule.
83. Yes, and I was like, have I been listening to
Here we
stuff
go.
that's that old? Oh, Faisal's doing it in real time.
Here we go.
Your
It's time
listening
to
age
wrap.
is going to be about
Let's
9.
Let's go.
Are you going to do your
No, that's
real thing, though, or are you
2025,
going to
that's the year.
pretend just to be cool,
Ready
Faisal?
for you.
What?
You can
Ready?
see
Your
his
list will
phone.
be counted. 3,500. Okay. Dance, pop, lullaby, Manchester, rap, and musicals.
Sums up your
Age
house
is just a
band side
number.
of things, Yeah.
28.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Hey,
Wow.
20 years younger.
And Katya, I wouldn't never be rude enough to ask you what your listening age is on Spotify. Thanks, you two.
Wrinkles
Thank
are just
you.
a frame of mind, Adam. It was really nice to see you. And nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for having me.